Welcome, everybody. This is Denny with Why Is This True and Get Wisdom. And today, Karl and I are going to continue with our channeling series. Karl Mollison and I have been doing these channeling series since April of 2017, and we're climbing up onto getting pretty close to having done 45 of these channeling interviews. And today we're going to do the light being John F. Kennedy, who Karl tells me successfully transitioned to the light. So a spirit rescue was not necessary. So as many of you know, John F. Kennedy was the 35th president of the United States. He served from January 20th to January 20th, 1961 to November 22nd, 1963. That was the day he was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. And Karl was a 17-year-old at the time. I was 5 years old at the time. And both of us, like many people who were alive at that time, knew exactly where we were, what we were doing when we heard the news. And it was kind of a shocking event for the country. And, my experience in doing the research and generating questions for this series was that, my sense is that we still, as a nation, we haven't really healed from that event after all these years. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you, Karl, for joining me. And just invite you to go ahead and talk a little bit about yourself, what we're going to do today, or any comments you might have about John F. Kennedy.
Thank you, Denny. I'm delighted to be here as always. This is kind of a parallel endeavor of yours and mine to learn the truth of things. And we're doing this publicly, and there's a reason for that as well. This is divinely guided to happen, as it turns out, and is a fruitful collaboration in many ways, because each person who wants to know something and engages with divine realm will get answers, but they'll get somewhat different answers because they're different people. They have different interests. They have a different focus. They have a different agenda in some ways, because we all come from differing backgrounds to some extent. And we're in different places with respect to our knowledge and our level of enlightenment. And so the intentions are different in going forward and even interacting with divine realm. Levels of belief are somewhat different. So two different people asking a similar question will get different answers to some extent. It's sort of in context of their life and who they are, what they bring in their awareness and knowledge. So this is something people aren't used to. It's sort of like, well, there's information, it's all in the encyclopedia, and anyone can go and look up that volume of the encyclopedia and get all the facts. This isn't how divine realm works. They dole it out according to your readiness, your need to know what the karmic consequences will be if you have that information. Is it going to serve your ego and fuel your ego to hold yourself above others and maybe even manipulate others to burnish your reputation? Or is there a higher purpose? And if it's just selfish, they might not even engage with you at all. They'll go silent. And if there is a high purpose, they'll still measure it out in proportion to where you are along that path of being enlightened and growing in your knowledge and understanding. So this is very much a process of feeling our way along, kind of earning our way along. They don't like me using that term earning, but that's my human perspective. It's sort of like, you have to earn your raps. You've got, if you want to be at bat, you've got to put in the training and the time and the practice. And so that's how I look at it. But it's a good analogy or a good metaphor, I think. And it's why the people who do work at it and put in scholarship will tend to be rewarded. And those who are more casual, who aren't as dedicated, who have a kind of a more superficial interest, they'll get superficial level material. So we're doing our best here, and we're working at this, and we are in earnest. And as a channeler, I'm very keenly aware of the pitfalls and the fact that most channelers are not authentic. They're being babysat by extraterrestrial psychics. even though they're reaching out to divine realm, they're falling short. And then an imposter will gladly step in and shake hands with them, engage, and start rewarding them with all sorts of little gems and wisdom and divine level information, but always to kind of divert. And they will be limited in what they get ultimately, because the extraterrestrials will not help them. They'll keep them busy thinking they're doing something useful, and they'll corrupt them eventually with this information. So this is going on. It's widespread. It's a real pitfall, and it's very sad to see. So I don't like pointing this out, and I always say that every time I point it out. I'm not here to get in anybody's way. I don't like being a wet blanket, but by golly, this is hard to do accurately and well. And we're working against beings who don't want us doing this. And that's part of the problem. And people don't start out doing channeling when they're on top of their game. You know, they have to start and work their way along and learn how to do it. And this makes them extremely vulnerable in the beginning to be co-opted. That's usually what happens. So I just want to help protect people from false information. And I've had a heck of a time in my own journey trying to sort through all this other information out there. And ultimately, I usually learn there's some truth in it, but it's not going far enough, and it's reaching a dead end that's intentional. So everybody's been herded into little cul-de-sacs and following their own instincts and their gurus and spiritual leaders who like using certain approaches and have a certain world perspective that has been given to them as disinformation. You know, that all they need to do is meditate and reach for the light and be forward looking and focus on what you want. And don't ever look at a problem. Don't ever look back. Don't focus on the negative. It will be destructive and it'll bring more negativity to you and so on. And so they're capitalizing on the law of attraction as the be all and end all and looking at the potential pitfalls of it and saying, don't ever do it to address a problem or an issue. And what they're doing then is disempowering you, because you do have to see if there's something wrong and figure out what it is.
Right.
This is what the divine realm does when they heal a person. They go in and see what happened to that person in the past to make them vulnerable, to drag them down, to get a karmic difficulty going. And then they'll go in the past to heal it. So that's how the divine realm does things. It's no different than what a doctor does in many ways.
Right. Or a mechanic
Yeah. They look what is it? What are the symptoms? When did it start? What else was going on that might have been a factor? And they'll really probe the history and then make some educated guesses and then go in and study you. They'll do lab work. They'll do other diagnostics maybe. So it's all about focusing on what's wrong in order to bring a solution.
Right.
So that's what we're doing with the channeling work here. We're going to the source in people who have lived through very important historic times, some of them, and having an opportunity to see what they say now from a divine level perspective. And they're not going to come back as punishers to out people, to create a witch hunt of some kind, or even what we would think of as righting the wrong and a righteous hunt for truth and a roundup and maybe even legal action.
Right.
They're not interested in those things because those are largely as destructive as they are constructive.
Right. And the other thing too that I'd like to point out is that they don't come back with all the baggage and characteristics and idiosyncrasies of their personality, so to speak, when they were incarnated as as that being. So the person that we think of as John F. Kennedy is just a manifestation of the light being for that particular incarnation. They don't really take that with them and express themselves back to us as that entity anymore. They're a light being now. They were a human, but they're a light being now, and a lot of those trappings fall away, and you won't see that in the channeling so much. In some cases, you will, but a lot of those personality quirks and stuff aren't really part of the package of them as existing as light beings. So yeah. I know that's really disturbing for a lot of people when they see, especially if they're new to channeling, is that they'll say, well, that didn't sound like so-and-so, as if they were going to get some kind of a disembodied version of that person. And that's just not the way it is.
Yeah, I won't be speaking with a Boston accent. Not going to happen.
Can you try?
Well, it's kind of funny. I mean, people think I'm, totally a flaking off the wall and, if not delusional, when I talk about channeling many forms of consciousness, including parts of Gaia and, talking to crystals and talking to plants and so on. Well, they don't talk in plant talk. The Creator uses a special kind of translator that can convert the ideas in a consciousness into words and sentences I'll understand that are in my vocabulary and put together in a way that makes sense to me because I'm the one asking, and also will take advantage of some of my figures of speech even because I know what they mean and they're kind of shorthand to understand an energetic aspect of something.
Yeah.
A kind of a broader meaning of something.
Right. And it points to the fact that actually language for humans is somewhat debilitating. We're prevented from communication that's probably more prevalent among sentient beings. It's not a language-based form of communication, so it's kind of like having to go through this gross filter to get these very complex, multidimensional ideas and then put them into words. It's like it's hard to be the winner in that equation, but that's just what we're dealt with here.
Yeah. We're not living as light beings at the moment. We came in from a light being existence, but we're living with a body that is not up to the ability to express light being level function. It has been impaired. It's been deliberately downgraded by genetic manipulation. But anyway, in terms of the topic du jour, I, like anyone who was old enough to understand the significance of what happened with Kennedy's regime and the assassination, was completely devastated by what took place. And even if you weren't a Democrat or a person, sympathetic to his policies and what he'd done as a president, we're still devastated by the reality of what happened, that a national leader of prominence was killed, and it changed so many things all at once. It created huge turmoil. And this spread around the world. And it's rather interesting, and I've heard this from a number of sources, that the world reaction was not expected by the extraterrestrials who run the world. They thought there would be a war that resulted from this, and they got the opposite. The world came together, not for real long, but for a while. Everyone was in sympathy for the U.S. and its citizens, first of all, and then even for one another, because they knew a light had been snuffed out. They could see the divinity in him, that he was truly bringing light into the world. They may not have liked his policies either, but they could sense intuitively that this was someone who had gravitas. He was important in some way, and we lost it, and we were the worst for it. And so I remember where I was when that happened. I was in high school and in a study hall when I learned about his death. And I still remember the people around me. and their reactions. It's like emblazoned on my memory. And I was working in a hospital lab in those days after school and on weekends. And I went in and I was working that evening. And I used to read the pathologist books at night when I had free time. And so one of the books I was working my way through was a forensic pathology book from the medical examiner of New York City. And if there's one thing they know in New York City is it's the pathology of all sorts of tragic, violent death and all the forensics about ballistics and ballistic evidence when there are gunshot deaths. And so based on what I knew as a teenager, I knew, well, they're going to figure this out rather quickly because there's a science they can apply here. And I was all about science and so forth. And I thought they're going to figure this out. They're going to know if it's a conspiracy. They're going to know who it was and have a pretty good idea. And this is going to be solved pretty quickly. And of course, I was naive. I thought that's the way the world worked. You know,
right.
that
the Justice Department.
They're working for the people, right? We serve and protect and, and so forth. And sometimes the opposite is the case. No one's really working for themselves. They're just doing what the cabal wants them to do. And if they have freedom, it's only conditional and only for a time. And if they don't cause trouble and all these sort of things. So anyway, I always was shocked by everything that happened day after day after day as I saw how the powers that be responded, what they said, what they didn't say. And of course, his assassin, would-be alleged assassin, being killed the next day or 2 days later, all these crazy, weird things, And all my life, I was obsessed with that event, not just because it was a high-impact event, but because I knew intuitively something was rotten in the state of Denmark. And so I followed the books and so on. And so now I'm still on the trail and I've learned quite a bit about this, but I'm still keenly interested because it turns out he was a figure of immense importance for humanity. And I'm hoping he'll fill us in a little bit about that in talking with him today. So I've been in two different worlds spanning that period of time when he was alive and who I am now, what I didn't know then and what I do know now. And most of the world needs to catch up with reality because they have no clue.
Right.
We're all living in an illusion.
Yeah.
And it's a stage managed illusion.
Yeah. And this is a great area of study to kind of accentuate that fact about there being an illusion. It's kind of like in the same category as 9/11. Only I think this one is probably more pivotal than even 9/11 in many ways, because this is about one man who is arguably probably one of the most powerful people at that time, and not just by virtue of the fact that he was the president, but by his intentions and that some of the things that he actually was able to do. Most notable of which was probably preventing a worldwide thermonuclear war. So, among other things, but it's kind of overwhelming if you try to like digest that whole elephant because it's pretty big, and like you say, it changed everything. And 9/11 did too. But this one kind of set the stage for 9/11 in a lot of ways too. There's an argument that probably had he not been assassinated, that stage for something like 9/11 would have been a lot harder to accomplish. There's an argument for that. It's all speculation, of course. But okay, well, with that, I've got 9 questions, and so let's go ahead and get started, and we'll see what we get here.
All right. It'll just take me a couple of moments to get my mind into the needed state of consciousness to make the connection, to set up safety around the work. I'm big on safety. It's a critical ingredient of any kind of intuitive outreach. Even simple meditation, one should always ask for a divine protection. Divine protection. Don't just put white light around you. You're not inviting God to come. You're inviting your mind to create a feeling of safety. Okay, that's fine. It'll help you feel good, but it won't put safety around you. You have to think. You have to think more deeply about things. The divine realm will do nothing for you unless you ask. They'll let you crash and burn. They'll let you be killed. They'll let you suffer your whole life long. It's your choice. You have to reach out and ask if you want help, protection, guidance, support of any kind. It's the way the rules have been set up. So you won't get a nanny standing next to you, wiping the drool off and checking your bib and all this stuff, checking your diaper. You'll get help when you ask, and then they'll leave you alone. And it's the free will. So, all right, I'll get off my soapbox. Sorry.
It's okay.
Well, it was a teachable moment, and people are so used to thinking what they're told is the be all and end all, and I've gone through that myself.
Right.
And I see the trap it represents.
Right.
And we need people out in the open looking at the truth. So, I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, it's okay. You don't need to apologize. It's important because a lot of people that are watching this are interested in channeling, and so it needs to be said. Pure and simple.
I mean well, and I'm truly not wanting to talk down to people. Just to kind of probe, just to stimulate their thoughts a little bit.
Right.
To think about things a little more deeply, because it takes that.
Right. And we're all learning here. I mean, there's some things that you've learned, and there's a lot of things that you still need to learn, just like me, just like everybody else. So this isn't, you're on a soapbox, but it's not the highest one in the room. Yep. And we're acknowledging that we're all learning. This happens to be an area where you've given a lot of study and thought to, and you've got something valuable that you could pass on to others. Whether they choose to accept it or not, it's their business. But just keeping your mouth shut about it doesn't help anybody.
Well, thank you for my defense.
Okay. Yeah, I've done it a few times.
I appreciate it, yeah. Because I don't want to be thought of as someone who pretends to be a know-it-all, and I'm just here to toot my horn or spout my own brand of reality and trash other people.
Right.
That's really not my intention at all. It's to be of service and to bring forth the truth of the divine and how to navigate and be a partner.
Right.
Okay. This is John Fitzgerald Kennedy, former U.S. President.
Thank you for joining us. What was the cause of your early childhood health problems, and were there karmic causes for the back problems and other health problems you suffered later in life?
All of my health concerns were karmic. This is the major cause of all physical illness: a prior calamity, a prior tragedy, a prior misfortune, a prior rash act that brings harm to someone else. Both good and bad, and largely the bad, are factors in all future misfortune and difficulty. My illnesses and frailties were because of prior lives when I endeavored to do acts of greatness and fell short. I was summarily punished, and severely so, by the powers at that time. and wanting all humans to keep their place and cause no difficulty, question nothing, interfere with nothing, and most of all, to not propose anything new that would raise questions and raise doubts about the current leadership. In a sense, I was taking on the political establishment, which goes beyond politics, as all politics are extensions of the workings of an extraterrestrial alliance, secretly pulling the strings, putting people in power, and then manipulating them to cause difficulty, become political roadblocks, and propose policies that will, in the end, be destructive in some way. This is the cleverness in which they operate. To appeal to prejudice they cultivate, to appeal to political divisions they cultivate, to appeal to personal needs for the shortcomings of life, which they cultivate. And then everything that happens or does not happen to solve these problems is then blamed on the humans, those present in the halls of government, the establishment hierarchy, those seemingly in charge, who are looked to as taking the responsibility. So all through history, humans have been suppressed. I worked diligently against these powers a number of times in a number of lifetimes. And like all who come to the earth plane and speak out, I was tortured and killed many times for the privilege of so-called freedom. This came back around as a karmic legacy. And in being in the energy of earth plane once again, with my recent incarnation, I was bombarded with all the old hurts, the problems of old times that never were healed. And this became a burden yet again for me. This befalls many, many people. They are taking on the weight of all their karmic doings in prior lifetimes, and it can be overwhelming and drag them down and undermine them physically. I fought this all through my life, but I have done this before and had other lifetimes where I had lofty notions and made bold steps to change the established order, and at the same time was suffering similarly. So the two went together in a series of lifetimes. The desire for making a profound impact in the face of personal adversity and personal suffering. So these were, in a way, kind of like twins, and a thread of karma that awakened yet again. And that was my destiny or fate, depending on which side one looks. I had the trappings of power, great political reach, and all of the attention and fame attendant with that. And I had the personal suffering in the background as my private burden. So mine was very much a karmic destiny all along, and a divine mission and a divine mission life to serve once again. This was not intended for me personally. I was the backup candidate, and it should have fallen to my brother, who was killed in war, to be the president. But he was assassinated, and so the duty fell to me. And then I was pressed into duty through karmic forces in alignment with my desire and decision to serve. So my life was a karmic play of sorts. This is true for all. Every person has a life shaped continually by the karma of all that has come before in their personal experience.
Okay, thank you. What did you learn from James Forrestal and Dwight D. Eisenhower? Were there any other figures in your political and spiritual education that you would like to mention?